Hello everyone, today I will talk about the F-16. This famous fighter jet manufactured in the United States is turning 50 years old, which is why we decided to bring a video telling more about its history and interesting facts about the most widely operated fighter jet in the world today. Here I want to share a bit about the history of this fighter, how it came about. Why did the United States decide to build what has become the most widely operated fighter in the world? Aviation enthusiasts might say that Soviet fighters sold more, operated more, but the F-16 is currently the most operated fighter in the world. This story starts with the Americans' need to build a plane like this. Why did they need to make the F-16? This came after the U.S. war experiences in the Vietnam and Korean Wars. Colonel John Boyd, who was an instructor in tactics for American pilots, along with mathematician Thomas Criss, developed the theory of energy maneuverability. This theory of energy maneuverability involved bringing together certain aspects of the aircraft and calculating based on that. So they considered the speed, drag, thrust, and weight of the aircraft and created a calculation with all these data. This allowed them to understand more about a fighter's combat capability. Why did they need to know this? Basically, to improve aircraft designs of this type. At that time, with these calculations, they could predict things in designs and also suggest new adjustments to bring a fighter that was increasingly capable, increasingly better. After all, a country's goal in developing an aircraft like this is to show superiority to opposing countries. Remember that at that time, the Cold War was at its peak. Therefore, the United States' major opponent was the Soviet Union. So, the Americans wanted to develop something that was far superior to what the Soviets were developing at that time. The U.S. Department of Defense in 1969 wasted no time when they learned about this. So, they started funding studies for the development of a new fighter, taking into consideration these calculations they were thinking about. This study was called the Lightweight Fighter Program. By 1971, this program of the U.S. Department of Defense received 6 proposals, but 2 of them moved forward from the American manufacturers General Dynamics and Northrop. The request for proposal to build a new fighter was issued on January 6, 1972, and this proposal demanded some technical specifications: an air-to-air combat fighter weighing around 9,000 kg, with good maneuverability, good range, good acceleration, and that was supersonic, flying a little more than 1.5 times the speed of sound, Mach 1.6 or about 1900 km/h. The United States Air Force predicted that air combat from that moment would take place at altitudes between 30,000 and 40,000 feet, so they demanded that this plane could perform well at these altitudes. With all these specifications, the 2 manufacturers that moved forward with the project received an investment from the U.S. government of $40 million, which, if we convert to today's money, would be about $290 million, to develop 2 prototypes. In the case of General Dynamics, this prototype was named the YF-16 and for Northrop, the YF-17. Just by the initial nomenclature, you can probably guess which of the 2 manufacturers took the project forward and won. But wait, we'll get there. According to the proposal, both projects would take 2 years of development and testing and should begin entering the first flight tests by 1974. However, General Dynamics rushed with the project and managed to launch its first YF-16 prototype in December 1973. The really interesting thing happened in January 1974. When the plane was starting its first taxi tests at the airport without the intention of flight, this story is well known for the F-16, that it accidentally flew. That's right, that's what happened. The test pilot at the time started the taxi and noticed some oscillations during this journey. So he decided to take off because he thought that if he didn't do that, the plane could crash.
The prototype F-16 continued its routine testing program. Chief Test Pilot Phil Erstreicher tells what happened at its first high-speed taxi trials.
The airplane accelerated very well and was soon seen to be at the 135 knot target level. I raised the nose and the airplane rather abruptly became airborne.
So he took off the plane, flew for about 6 minutes, landed again, but this was not considered the official first flight, just an accidental flight. It wasn't supposed to happen. It was the pilot who decided that to avoid a mishap at that moment.
Flight of the F-16 from General Dynamics took place on February 2, 1974. The plane flew for about 90 minutes, and this was done at Edwards Air Force Base in California, where many projects are developed and many flights of U.S. military aviation take place. The year 1974 continued with more tests of this prototype. Everything was done as it should be until the following year, on January 13, 1975, when the U.S. Air Force Secretary John McLucas decided that the winner was indeed General Dynamics YF-16. But the reasons were not only because they did things first, flew earlier, and all that they were more concerned with the plane's performance, operational cost of the plane, and the YF-16 demonstrated superiority over the YF-17 from Northrop. This plane had better performance, better range, better speed compared to the YF-17, and another big advantage was the implementation of the fly-by-wire system for flight control. I'm talking about the 1970S, so this was a big innovation back then. Northrop's YF-17 had a hydromechanical system, and fly-by-wire was already better because computers were already controlling the flight. This brought more operational comfort for the pilot. It was already a new technology. In fact, at the time, the YF-16 gained fame that the pilot doesn't fly the plane, but the plane flies with the pilot. This plane was equipped with the Pratt & Whitney F-100 engine, the same engine that equipped the F-15 Eagle. And this was also a decisive factor because one engine equipping two different planes reduced operating costs, maintenance costs. Because of all these positive points, the United States Air Force ordered 6 units of the new YF-16. But now, the plane would lose the letter Y and would be called F-16. 2 versions, F-16 Alpha, which is the single-seat version, and the F-16 Bravo, the 2-seat version. After almost 2 years of adjustments and tests on these versions already in the United States Air Force, finally the F-16 in its final version at that time entered into operation in the U.S. military aviation. The first unit of the F-16 Alpha, now as a combat aircraft, was delivered to the U.S. Air Force in January 1979. It entered into operation in the 34th Tactical Fighter Squadron at Hill Air Force Base in Utah. This happened on October 1, 1980. So we're talking about more than 10 years after the idea started until it entered into operation. The F-16 was officially named the Fighting Falcon, but U.S. Air Force pilots and mechanics nicknamed this plane the Viper because it resembled the shape of a snake. This nickname also happened because of a television program at that time called Battlestar Galactica, which featured a fictional aircraft called the Colonial Viper. And so, the F-16 also ended up gaining that nickname. But what about the competitor, the Northrop YF-17? Did they simply burn $40 million and forget about it? Of course not. Northrop is also a strong, well-known U.S. military aircraft manufacturer, and they continued with the project, but not with the U.S. Air Force. They ended up going to a program of the American Navy called Navy Air Combat Fighter in 1975. This ended up going to another project that would later become an aircraft manufactured by McDonnell Douglas, the F/A-18 Hornet. Now, talking about the versions of the F-16. There were many, and I won't mention all of them here in this video. So I'll mention the main ones. The idea of these versions was always to bring improvements to this aircraft. So it started with the F-16 Alpha and Bravo, right? The Alpha single seat and the Bravo two-seat versions, and these were the initial production, bringing versions Block 1, 5, 10, 15, and 20. The Block 15 version was the first one that had a major design modification to the aircraft. They added a larger horizontal stabilizer, and this was the most produced version. Then there were the F-16 Charlie and Delta. Charlie single seat, Delta two-seat. They entered into operation in 1984 with the Block 30 and 32, 40 and 42, and 50 and 52 versions. Then there were the F-16 Eco and Fox. Eco single seat, right, for one pilot, and Fox two-seat, for two people. These are the most recent variants of the F-16 in the Block 60 version. This version brought avionics improvements, brought back and has the Viper F-16 version because they ended up using the V in reference to the word Viper. Right, which was the F-16's nickname. And the F-16V brought the Block 70 and 72 versions. And, of course, we're already talking about the year 2012. So what this plane brings is the most modern in aviation that could be embedded in this plane. Remembering that the F-16 is not a fifth-generation aircraft, right? It's an aircraft from the 1970s, but everything they could change in this new version of avionics improvements, they put, like for example, new radars and other equipment implementation. They put new automation systems and new, more powerful engines. Throughout these 50 years of history, other versions were created not only for operation within the United States, but the F-16 was a fighter produced for export. That's why it is currently the most operated fighter in the world. There are more than 2,000 units of this fighter being flown, operated in air forces around the world. In the meantime, General Dynamics was acquired by Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin knew this was a very good project and continued with the development. They made the F-16 Sufa, especially for the Israeli Air Force. They also made the F-16IN for the Indian Air Force. For Iraq, it was the F-16 IQ. India, Quebec. The F-16 MLU in the Alpha and Bravo versions, remember Alpha single seat, Bravo two-seat, was made for some countries in Europe like Norway, Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, and Portugal. Now, besides these well-known versions, there were some hidden variants out there in the world, some of which were not even produced. The F-16N or TF-1N was a version produced to meet the United States Navy, a training aircraft. It's a derivative of the F-16 Charlie and Delta, Block 30, but without weapons. 22 units of the F-16N and 4 units of the TF-1N were produced. There was the 79 export fighter F-16, as the name suggests, an export fighter. There was also the F-16 XL2 prototypes built to test supersonic maneuverability incorporating a new delta wing design. This project entered into competition as a substitute for the F-111, but ended up losing to the F-15 Eagle. However, they didn't discard it, and it ended up being used by NASA for tests until 2009. The F-16 model also had a technology demonstrator variant, the X-62 Vista. They tested some systems as well, push vector and things that would pave the way for the development of a new fifth-generation fighter ahead, the F-35 Lightning II.